So, what what exactly do you mean by vocal vitality? Why does it matter for leaders?
When we think of how we show up in the world, most of the time it has to do with our personality, our presence, how we're communicating with people. And a lot of the times, especially for leaders, that is something they already kind of have an image of their mind about. I want to show up as this kind of leader, fill in the blank. I know with your work, you talk about, presence. There is a presence that needs to be cultivated. The one piece that people don't think a lot about when it comes to their presence is their voice. And so to me, when I was even considering what it meant to highlight the voice as an instrument, it is vital, an asset to your role as a leader, but also needs vitality, liveliness, and a
Mm,
connection that's deeper than just how you sound, so that when you speak, that leadership presence really takes a full resonant approach, and you can, just like other parts of your body, keep it vital and full of vitality throughout your life.
and what do you mean by the vitality?
Vitality to me is both the sound of the voice, so keeping it vibrant. A lot of people come to me saying, I don't want to sound dull, monotone, not really engaging. Oh, I don't like it when I sound flat. And so they want that quality to it. They want it to sound clear and something that people find, interesting to listen to. And at the
Mm,
same time, I think for me, vitality also goes into what gives us the most well-being when we are looking at any avenue of our life. And to me, voice just happens to be the modality that I believe can increase our well-being. So your vitality, your overall, whether it's presence, charisma, how you're physically feeling, can be showcased through how you sound.
interesting. And I'm sure there's some common mistakes that you see that leaders make all the time with their voice. Could you kind of drill down on that a bit?
Yes, absolutely. One of the ones I kind of alluded to is that sense of the voice coming across, or them being concerned or having been told that their voice just isn't engaging enough, And so most people will say things like, "Well, I can't project," or "I'm told I need to speak up." Okay, we
Mm,
can look at that as a factor, but a lot of times when the voice doesn't feel as dynamic as it could be, that's when you can kind of lose the listener, lose the audience, or the, as it were, command over a room that you might have. So when people are having this sense that, okay, if I listen back to myself and my voice just doesn't really modulate that much, there's not a lot of change. We look at things like their pitch, like their volume, their inflection, how they're using, the different kind of surface components. But what's interesting about that is often it doesn't just have to do with, okay, let's go up and down in pitch, because that would start to sound inauthentic. And we don't want that. And a lot of times I see this as a troubleshooting error in the voice world, where people are trying to get speakers and leaders to sound more maybe charismatic. And so if you just talk with a lot of personality like this, but like, who wants to listen to that for the whole time? And does that fit
mm,
you? Or how about you go listen to and mimic this person? Maybe for some ideas, but that's not truly who you are. So in that, I think that's the biggest myth, that if you feel like your voice is flat or bordering on monotone and just kind of here and not really a lot to it, don't just go take it to extreme and try to put on, or kind of try on a different voice. We want to be playful with this instrument,
mm,
but we don't want to come across as kind of a fake it till you make it. One of the CEOs I worked with, she is a former nurse, and she had run a company that was within a Fortune 175 uh, ranking. She came to me after years of leading different groups throughout hospitals, and then to that point of starting her entrepreneur journey. She's like, "Brian, I don't want to sound dull, but I did have this presence coach back in the day. She had, told her, okay, here's how you're going to use your body language. Here's how you're going to show up a little more collaboratively in how you
mm,
communicate. Great. but her voice yet didn't match all these other places. So we worked on the physical sound because, yes, she did kind of have a flat, sometimes even raspy, sometimes back in the throat sound that
Mm,
after a while, even she got tired of, and tired as in mentally tired. She's like, I don't want to listen to me anymore, and physically tired. And so we worked on the physical component, but we also had to look at how she thought a leader should show up. And she thought it had to be kind of low and in this certain kind of restricted range. And if I'm here, that will sound authoritative.
mm,
That didn't match her. And now, within that time, we worked for 6 months, but that was a few years ago. And so now, in the time of her building her and scaling her entrepreneur business and leadership coaching, she doesn't even sound like this as I know her. She doesn't even sound like the same person because she's open to her voice being what matches her, not trying to fit into some mold that leadership, especially for women, tends to try to box them into.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get to that. Definitely want to drill into that in a second.
Yeah.
Um, let's double click on a couple of things. So, what's the impact when a leader's voice is too soft?
Ooh, okay. Too soft. If it's soft relative to volume, a lot of the downsides that people experience are being networking events and not being able to be heard. So they stop talking a lot sooner. It's hard to compete with that background noise depending on the event. Being in a I think folks, be nervous about being in a room where maybe there's not a microphone available or they're not willing to give it a try because of there's still some weird stigmas about using a
Mm,
microphone. That can impact how people are going to receive you and even continue to pay attention. And then I even had a client who she had started taking an assistant professor job, and the person in the position as her boss, when she asked, can I have a microphone for my lecture hall, which is not an unreasonable request.
right.
Teachers and professors are one of the highest risk for getting a voice injury because they have to talk so much. And he said, well, I don't know. If you can't project your voice, you may not be the right person for this job. That okay, well, that's an interesting perception to unpack and a bias to unpack. So I think it has to do with first and foremost, can the person physically make the volume of their voice that they need to? If not, we
Mm,
need to look into that. And on the other side, are they holding back? Are they restricting themselves and kind of dampening themselves and talking softer because they feel uncertain, unconfident in some way? And so then we have to delve deeper.
so you potentially a couple things going on.
Yeah.
If you're just sort of too soft, you don't have the range.
Yeah.
First of all, people can't hear you.
I just,
Second of all, you get more self-conscious
yes.
and may stop um, communicating when they may need you the most.
Right. What you have to say is still important. And communication is a two-way street. You can't just
Mm,
expect to go 75% and the other person only coming 25%. Ideally, it's a 50-50 compromise. So in those situations, yes, if there's ways they can strategize and adjust from a physical environment standpoint, great. But also don't discount what you're here to say. That soft
mm.
spokenness should not be a deterrent to someone going, oh, well, I'm not going to listen to you. And so I want people to really become comfortable and confident in the voice that they have, but also explore, play, try on versions that feel good to them because we all have different voices depending on the day, the person, the environment that we're in. So if you can tap into the choices that you have with your voice, that same soft spoken person might be the life of the party in their intimate group of friends, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
So I think it's really important not to take someone's voice and we do this as humans. We're quick to, we're always looking to perceive and judge, but the moment that we do that suggests that there's already something you're judging about yourself. And so we need to look at how we can shift beyond that.
yeah. What
Yeah.
about what's the impact when a leader's voice is monotone flat?
Yeah, so the flatness can really I've had people both flat voice and what's called glottal fry. So this is an example of glottal fry for those of you. Yeah, Chris, Chris is like, we know it when we hear it, you know.
Hmm.
Those types of voices, again, they have important things to say, of course. And at the same time, there is just something about the way the ear is perceiving it and whether that person is hard of hearing, whether that person has what's called misophonia, meaning things like loud chewing, nails on a chalkboard to them. You know, there are certain auditory perceptions that might be innate to that listener, but the bigger impact, even back to that client who's a former nurse and CEO, she was noticing that that didn't carry at that time. We were still in 100% Zoom mode, lockdown mode. It wouldn't carry through the screen. She was running conversion events, these launch events, and she's like, I'm going to be teaching for up to 10 days, trying to take sales calls after that, ideally. And if I can't connect with my audience through the screen, they're going to turn me off, which is true. If I don't know how many of you, even if you just for a day, just notice how often you hear, whether it's on, I hear it often actually on a lot of the news shows and radio shows. Certain correspondence, as well as some podcast for those podcast lovers, you know, like Chris is out here. It is interesting to see how long you can tolerate listening to a
Yeah.
monotone sound. And again, no judgment. You just may not enjoy that, but it can be harder and more taxing for someone to tease apart what are they saying versus how do they sound that, and they'll turn you off. They'll turn it off. And in
Yeah.
her
So
case,
people,
oh yeah, go ahead.
sorry, so people lose interest, or they
Yeah.
won't know like what's really important to you
No,
because
because there's
you
no
can
emphasis. Everything's the same level. And so that's too where people get that surface level trick of like, okay, we'll just play with a lot of wide inflection. Well, no, that's not what you want assistant. Can you imagine listening to a keynote speech, that entire extreme? No. So I don't think being the loudest in the room means you're a leader. I don't think being the softest in the room means you're a leader. I think when you are willing to look at how your voice most naturally feels and connects, that makes the biggest difference. And if you're willing to look at all these areas that you consider a leadership asset, voice comes into that. So
Mm.
when you're running an event, when you're leading your team, and it comes down to people engaging or people not, that's going to hurt the bottom line at some point. You know, people are
Yeah.
either going to be on board or they're not. They're going to, in the case of teaching through the screen, they're going to jump on that sales call or they're not. So I've seen it kind of encompass a number of ways that people think they're showing up in usually ways that other people have suggested they should show up. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. There's a Harris poll. I think it's 2023. It said the average company loses 8 hours per week per employee
Yeah.
in miscommunication.
Oh, yes. That doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
staggering.
that is very much, especially when we are already for a lot of us both in hybrid, both in person and in
Hmm.
virtual. And that's where I think too the voice piece becomes even more important because people will come to me saying, "Well, I get chastised for my tone of voice." And how many of us have been there when our communication breaks down because, but that's not what I meant, and not how I said it. It can be a mess. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's definitely something that goes deep for a number of the folks that I work with as well. And I think that's where alignment really is the key to that well-being piece, which leads back to that overall vitality that you feel when you are speaking.
Hmm. What about uptalk? What's the effect of uptalk?
Yeah, so a lot of times when people are in uptalk mode, and for those of you who have not heard it or didn't know that's what it was called, it's when you end a statement with a question, even if you're just doing a statement. And so everything sounds like you're second guessing yourself. So the impact can be that your listener is not finding you credible. They can consider you to be not as confident. And for yourself internally, if you listen back and you hear yourself doing uptalk a lot, you might want to start to just reflect on where you aren't feeling confident in what you're saying. So, uptalk in and of itself is not a bad thing. we kind of do it depending on if we're paying attention. I still do it. It's not something we're trying to eliminate fully because we
Mm,
do in English language at least, we do need those different inflections to signal certain things. But when it's so constant, kind of like certain interjections that I hear too much as well, that can bring in this sense of doubt, lack of credibility. And again, back to that auditory piece, if someone just cannot stand that same pattern of going up at the end of every statement, they're going to turn it off. They're going to tune out.
mm,
So I think with uptalk, it really, we have to look at, are you in a scenario or group of people where that is the norm? Sometimes those are the things we just pick up because that's the people that we're around the most. Other times it's just part of, the communication style that we use, but we have to be willing, again, going back to choices with your voice, to say, you know what, in this instance, I'm going to turn on my, whatever you want to call it, your presenter's voice, your leader
mm.
voice. You don't have to, again, eliminate these things across the board, but I think the more you can be mindful of it, the more you tap into those more subtle positive effects that can come from saying the statement and being complete, and the confidence and assuredness in what you're saying that flows through that naturally as well.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned a number of sort of common mistakes that people can make when their voice is not well trained and well tuned. You could be too soft. You could be too flat. You get that verbal, the verbal fry. Um, you can get uptalk. You could be come across as like too scripted and inauthentic, and all of those can undermine the people's perception of.
Can, and that includes the quality. For some people, a raspy sound will
Mm,
also make them question. That usually becomes disruptive to the listener because the raspiness drowns out, again, the words that are coming through. And so then we have to
mm,
look at what is going on with your mechanism and the health and effectiveness of that mechanism. And that's something that I've specialized for the last 17 years in, because a lot of times people think that it'll get better if I just keep talking, and the raspiness doesn't. And I've watched from keynote speakers all the way to educators start talking and the voice just continues to deteriorate in quality.
mm,
And so by the end, you're like, wait, what was their message? I wonder if they're sick. Like, is everything okay? Like, you're worried about them maybe, but you're also not exactly tuned into what they were saying. So I think that's a big one that people often overlook because they think, oh, they're fine. It's probably just temporary. But if your voice is
mm.
doing that every time you talk within the first even 20, 30, 45 minutes, and it's just kind of fading out, or you're struggling to even get it to come out smoothly, that's not going to be a long-term strategy for effective communication.
So, okay, so what do we do about this? What should we know about like breath, posture, um, that will
Mm.
help leaders come across as more listenable and authoritative?
Mm. Oftentimes people think that just talking warms up the voice, but I've been speaking all day. To me, you have to look at it in that more individualized sense first. What is your breath doing? Have you been holding your breath all day? Well, you're probably more likely then, if you're shallow breather or a breath holder, I see y'all, it's okay. I do it too sometimes, to really push your voice or kind of strain it, or you're feeling fatigued by the end of the day and then you're working that much harder. So for
Mm,
those of you who experience that, my estimate is you are physically feeling this drain unnecessarily. And that's going to make it feel like it's harder and harder to get the activities you need done, but also connect with people in the way you want. So we look at breath. We look at how you're warming up the physical instrument of the voice. So if you were to just speak all day, but you're speaking kind of with this push or this discomfort, that's kind of reestablishing the same pattern that you're already in, right? How can we break that pattern?
mm,
So just like the athlete who's going out there and feels, oh, my ankle's a little sore today. I don't know. I'm still just going to do the exact same workout. I'm going to push myself through that marathon. probably not a great idea, right? There's got to be some strategic adjustment. And as leaders, you know this. You have to look at the big picture and go, where do we strategically adjust to make the most bang for our buck? What's the most efficient thing we can do here and still keep the momentum forward? So I think, yes, there's breath. Yes, there's voice exercises that can be helpful. When it comes to posture, I'd say in person, typically okay. On computers and on any sort of virtual situation, the ergonomics of sitting with the head protruded forward, or if
Tech
you
neck.
are, what's that?
Tech neck. I
Yes,
think it's
there you go.
yeah.
Oh, I love that term. Yeah. There we go.
It's
That's going
exactly.
to change how your whole mechanism is
Mm,
feeling and the sense of fatigue that you'll get. So, yes, there are definitely posture things. And I think a lot of us, when we're under stress, and I would venture to say the majority of leaders are feeling some sort of stress, positive, while also heavy dose of negative stress, depending on the day, we have to adjust to the nervous system. And how is our nervous system acclimating to the stressors that are in front of us? Because for some people, stress will result in stomach ulcers, and for other people, stress will show up in your voice. And so, how
mm.
can we be holistic about this and make sure that your entirety of how you manage your own replenishment recovery is addressed?
Yes. When leaders breathe, should they be breathing like from their throat? Should they be breathing from their chest? Should they be breathing from their belly? What,
Good question.
yeah.
So interestingly, when it comes to how we use our speaking voice, we use on the order of at most 20 to 25% of our resting lung volume. Now, don't worry about that from a, numbers standpoint. I get all geeky about anatomy. But when we think of where our breath flows, yes, it's flowing through our throat, what's called our larynx, our voice box, into
Mm,
our windpipe, down into the lungs, and then the diaphragm, i.e., down into that torso area. The diaphragm's acting like a piston, helping kind of regulate that pressurization. So when we breathe in, and if we're doing that fuller, like where you pointed, Chris, down to your torso, fuller in breath, the diaphragm will push all the guts out of the way so we can really take that big, full, replenishing breath. And then it'll come back up and help pressurize and on the exhale, sending that air more easily up and out. We can't do that when we speak though, right? We can't be in this huge inhale, exhale situation all the time.
mm,
So what I recommend first is I always, when I'm doing voice screening, so listening to the voice, looking at how your mechanics are working, I look at what's your resting breath pattern and then what's your breath pattern when you speak. And it's okay that those two could be different. But if you're speaking, so to your demonstration, Chris, if you're breathing and just kind of keeping it shallow up here and really only using from about, the clavicle up, and
mm,
folks who do this will know the moment I say it because they go, oh, okay, I need to take a full breath. I think that's where you have to be willing to incorporate breath practices that engage that more low, relaxed, full inhale, full exhale.
mm,
Switching into speaking, it's a combination. So it depends on whether you need to speak loud. It depends on, like we talked about, with the dynamics throughout an entirety, of a sentence or a speech. And I think we need to really look at, are you making sure that when you reset that breath, you have practiced a lower full breath? Because
mm,
otherwise, if you're always topping off the tube, let's say, up here, you're going to only feel like you're constantly pushing from basically the throat up. And that's not going to feel so good. So breathe, yes, for a relaxed breath through the torso, kind of through the belly, but don't get in your head about breathing from the diaphragm, air quotes, for speaking. Okay.
mm.
It's much more important that, yes, you're taking those replenishing breaths, because that's a problem I see a lot of people do when they are going and going and going, and then they're just right at the end of that sentence and they suck it back in. That's going to stress the system out. So take
Mm,
those replenishing breaths, honor when you need to kind of readjust, and your voice is a very sophisticated, resilient mechanism. It wants to work efficiently. So I actually don't want you thinking about your breath a lot when you speak.
mhm,
Because if it
mhm.
is already aligned, feels good to you, is sounding better to you, awesome. It's working the way it
Yeah.
needs to. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
What is one myth about voice that you wish leaders would stop?
Oh, so many good ones. I would say that hmm, that voice is something that is infinite. If you feel like this is an instrument that you wake up and take for granted because
Mm,
maybe you are one of the few lucky ones who's never had laryngitis, never had a cold where you've lost your voice for even a short period of time, you believe that this will be here for you always in the exact same way it always has been. And I think that, like other parts of our body, other systems, this is an opportunity to be proactive and be preventative. So when people say to me, well, I've been talking for 40 years of my life. Why now? Why is something happening? We can predict to some degree who might be more at risk than another to have some voice issues that will disrupt not only how it sounds, how they feel about their communication, but their leadership style. But we really have to consider that just because you've never had a voice issue doesn't mean you won't, and to not be reckless with how you use your voice. And what I mean by that in particular is there are some very well-known names out there, both in leadership space, in personal development, in motivational coaching and speaking,
mm,
who have atypical sounding voices, who continue to, as I observe them and listen to them, do things with their voice that clearly their voice is maxed out on doing.
mm,
And while for some of these folks, I do know what they've either tried or not behind the scenes, I think we have to be willing to say, you know what? What's healthiest and best for my voice? I don't want to just assume that a raspy sound is sexy. I hear that a lot. If my voice is a little
mm.
raspy, it's sexy sounding. It sounds really cool. Maybe to some, but it also means there's something physically damaged.
Yeah.
So when that myth comes to head, it's when people are thinking that this instrument really can go on without any sort of conditioning, preventative training, just awareness. For those of you listening today, you are ahead of the curve because you are at least that much more aware, like, what does my voice do? What's it capable of? I don't know. What's the possibilities? But don't think that shouting and yelling and screaming and cheering so encouragingly to your kids over their sporting events over the weekend and you lose your voice means that you can do
Mm,
all the same activities to lead your team during that next work week. It's just not how that mechanism can handle the load, as it were.
right.
And everybody's load is different, so it's okay to explore that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like with athletes,
Yes,
you get an injury,
yes,
it's an indication that the load that you put on that particular muscle or joint or tendon,
yes,
you just weren't, it wasn't prepared for. And
yes,
so the rehabilitation to strengthen those things is really, really important
yes,
to athlete recovery, not just rest.
yes,
Um,
exactly. And when there is some
so,
sort of understanding that
mm,
I don't know if you've ever run across these folks, Chris, but there's still this like I don't even call it a badge of honor, but yes. I was at a business conference last fall. It was a mark of a good conference for some people that they lost their voice by the end because look at all the talking and networking I did.
mm,
Okay.
yeah,
How you gonna do the things next week to like follow up on those new
yeah,
leads? No.
yeah.
And lead your
The
meeting.
equivalent
Anyway,
of I didn't sleep for 96 hours. I'm
exactly.
really dedicated to my
That's
job. It's
amazing.
like, yeah,
Exactly. So yeah, just like an athlete's going to adjust their training regimen, being proactive and preventative about it means that you don't have to end up in a voice clinic like I worked at for 14 years,
mm,
where literally people would be like, I don't know what happened, like what's going on, and they are at the point for some deciding whether or not they might have to have surgery. Like we want to avoid that. Can we just you got things to do and things to say, and we want to keep your voice going throughout the longevity of your career, but also just the changes that we experience as we age as humans. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So preventative action always cheaper and less
Always
painful than corrective action.
less painful indeed. Yes.
So what are some preventive actions
Hmm.
leaders can take to strengthen their vocal vitality?
Yeah, great question. One of the things that you guys will see that'll be part of this is some of the top tips that I have for kind of setting this foundation. So, kind of look for that. It's just a kind of rundown of some basic ways that you can start becoming more aware of your voice. One of the biggest things people, and this kind of goes into the myth category as well, is they figure, well, if I've drank some water during the day, I'm probably hydrated, it's probably fine. Maybe it depends on if you've been on a plane and the air is dry. It depends
Mm,
on if you have already been talking a lot, if you live in a dry environment, if you tend to feel thirst, it means you're already underhydrated. And if you have something coming up that day, guzzling a bunch of water the morning of, not ideal. Water takes anywhere from 24 to 48 hours to get through the system of your body.
mm,
So we can't just be kind of doing this. I don't believe in quick fixes. I don't think that's a thing. We're not here to be fixed, but also we need to have that kind of routine. So with hydration, I think that's a big one that people kind of underestimate for themselves. I always encourage people play with a week of adding an additional glass of water to your day. Let's just say one, one extra glass of water from what you already do. See how you physically feel, see if the brain fog has lessened. Just kind of notice, like, do you still feel thirsty? Just kind of do that goal. If you work out a lot, do it, hydrate more. But then also, it's not just the water we drink, it's the surface moisture. So we all know this if we end up being mouth breathers, if we snore at night, um, if we have, allergies and things, those kind of things can dry out the throat. So what I always encourage
mm,
people to do as well is whether you're going to take a steamy shower at some point to keep that moisture going, or there's even portable, and you'll see this in the handout, there's even portable nebulizers that you can breathe in
mm,
that steam and keep things really well lubricated. When it comes to then the voice itself, we kind of alluded to this idea of warm ups. When you can look at the voice as its own instrument and asset to warm up, that can be something that really gives you a lot more flexibility, like in your pitch, like in your volume, in your coordination with that breath that you're trying to
mm.
get enlivened each day. So voice warm ups can be really helpful in that way. And then we also look at things like, are you a person who has irritation in your throat? And what I mean by that, maybe you throat clear a lot. If you're not sure what a lot is, ask your partner or your
Mm.
cubicle mate or your
I'll
team.
let you know.
They'll tell you. Because sometimes it just becomes habitual and you just don't even notice. So when you're throat clearing a lot, that's a signal that your voice is not feeling comfortable, that something's going awry. And so there's also ways to make sure you can soothe that and still become aware, wow, actually I throat clear more when I am in conversation and I feel nervous, or I throat clear more first thing in the morning. Like, start to notice patterns. The
Mm,
final thing when it comes to kind of proactively preparing your voice, you, as we spoke about, you are a vocal athlete. If you need to use your voice to do your job for your livelihood, and so in this, when you are looking at your entire week, can you get a sense of your vocal load? How can you be strategic with this? So, if you are someone who is on calls, is leading team meetings, having to do networking events, talking with the kids and family after work, whatever your amount of voice use is, I strongly encourage you to do an inventory. List out the things that you do with your voice in a day. You might be surprised, actually. If you talk to yourself, count that. Okay. If you belt out a song in the car, count that. But if you look across that list of activities and how long kind of you spend in each of those activities, that even just from a planning standpoint, I had a client. She This was so helpful for her because she was just built. This was in just early 2020, just before lockdown. She was in the early stages of her business, Her voice had already been struggling because she was working her live streams as often as she could to try to build her audience. Well, she starts building out each of her launches for the year. And as she's doing that, we start looking at her vocal load. And it turned out she had already, without thinking about it, because this was just how she did it, she had stacked so much stuff of talking right up against a launch and right after a launch
Mm,
that she was like, I don't know, that's just what I do. Well, you don't anymore because you have met that threshold. Your voice is not going to tolerate that at this
yeah.
point because it's underperforming. So to be a peak performer, you also have to be smart about delegating. So I encourage y'all to just look at your week. If you have a conference coming up, an event coming up, if there is just something where you know you're going to be talking more, where can you lighten the load a little bit for yourself before and after? I think that's really important and something a lot of people miss.
Awesome. So I'm hearing, first of all, stay hydrated.
Mhm.
So yeah, hydration surge doesn't work. You need
Yeah,
to be consistent
you
about
got to be
it.
consistent and play with your levels.
Yeah. Throat lubrication,
Yes,
especially for those who have dry throats.
yes.
There's some ways to steamy hot showers, the
Steamy.
mask.
Yep. In my water right now, I have lemon in my water because it's going to
Mm.
activate the salivary glands. Yes, sir. Way to go, Chris. We are normalizing drinking while talking. Thank you. Drinking water while talking. Same goes for all y'all on stage. Okay, just take a sip. It's fine. Nobody cares. And so, yes, having the water, but with even with lemon, because your salivary glands, anything tart will activate the saliva. That's going to be more moisture.
Mm.
While it's not directly touching your vocal folds, that is a myth. Your vocal folds do not have water coming down on them. We would choke. We've all been there. But again, you're going from that holistic piece of when you feel dry up into the throat, that changes how you're working the whole speech and communication flow. Yeah. Yeah.
100%. And then warm-ups. Like
Hmm.
we stretch before we run or
Correct.
exercise. Why not warm up the warm up the voice and
The
the whole
sound.
voice
Exactly.
system
Exactly.
beforehand? And then I'm hearing manage your vocal load.
Yes.
So if you know you're going to be doing an intense amount of speaking at a certain period of time, how do you
Yes.
you know manage beforehand so you don't show up with voice fatigue?
Well, exactly. The voice fatigue right there is that you hit it as one of the first indicators. So that might even be the ticket to maybe you don't have a big event or reason that you're going to be talking a lot of extra, but you started the week with that little tickle at the back of your throat. Or you're still feeling fatigued from Friday after happy hour, and that's weird. You rested over the weekend, but it's so you've got to be able to start listening to these signals that the instrument is giving you. And I'm not immune. People always go, you have to do it too, Brienne? Yes. This is part of the process. I went to a conference and a day in, I lost my voice, got laryngitis, and I was like, of course. So much for some networking. Well, what was interesting was that I'm using the same strategies that I advise all my clients to, whether it's writing down, I wrote down things, I'm on voice rest, I won't be able to talk as much. I could
Mm,
figure out how much I had in my bank, my voice bank, before I had to take that additional break from people. And I didn't fret over, oh,
mm,
I lost out on that conversation, because I had alternate ways to still engage and follow up with people after. And people were so gracious and caring and understanding. So remember, you do not have to push yourself to the point of fatigue and oblivion with your voice. People want to listen, they want to help, they want to be uh, collaborative, even in that moment where you're like, I got to use this little pen and paper right now. That's okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for spending time today.
of
What's
course.
the best way for people to find out more about you and your
Yeah, absolutely. The place that you can find a lot of resources, including my blog with some of these things we talked about, as well as if you feel like jumping on a call to learn more about what's going on with your voice, is my website, yourvocalvitality.com. So www.yourvocalvitality.com. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I love talking with people and seeing what you do with your voice. Facebook is a great way to connect with me as well, and even YouTube. YouTube videos out there, although that might be growing soon. We shall see.
work? All right. Fabulous, Brian. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. I appreciate you.